in that gloomy town called Radford, where the days seemed gray and the nights were filled with mysteries, I lived Jake Morgan. My house stood on the corner of St. Paul and Birch Street, overlooking the old cemetery slope. It was, in any case, a quiet spot until one day something strange happened that changed my entire life. My friend David and I always loved to explore abandoned places, and the old house on the edge of town had always beckoned us. Overgrown with ivy and half engulfed by the forest, it was a true relic of the past, a place our parents forbade us to go. But curiosity got the better of us. We cautiously opened the creaking front door and entered. The floorboards under our feet traitorously creaked, and the air inside was heavy and dusty. Sunbeams pierced through the dirty windows, illuminating the thick layer of dust that covered everything. In the corner of the living room, we noticed an old chest, half hidden under a torn coverlet. Its lid was ajar, as if inviting us to look inside. The chest was filled with old toys and books. Among them, one thing stood out, a wooden doll, skillfully carved and painted. It was dressed in a tiny dress, and its eyes seemed to follow our every move. We picked it up and noticed that on its back was engraved a strange inscription in some ancient language. "Look at this strange doll," said David, examining the inscription. "I wonder what it means." We didn't know that this doll would be the beginning of a nightmare. We decided to take it with us, thinking it would be an interesting addition to our collection of finds. On the way home, I couldn't shake the feeling that the doll seemed to come alive in my hands. Its eyes appeared to glint with malicious intent. That night, I had a nightmare. I saw a dark forest where whispers could be heard. Among the trees appeared that very doll, its eyes glowing with a red light. It reached out its tiny hands to me and I could not move, paralyzed by fear. I woke up in a cold sweat and discovered that the doll lay on my desk, though I was sure I had left it in a box at the other end of the room. The next day I told David about my dream, but he just laughed it off. "It's just a doll, don't give it so much importance," he said, trying to calm me down. But something inside me screamed that there was something more to this doll. We decided to show it to our friend Jack, who was into history and occultism. Maybe he could decipher the inscription on the doll's back. Jack examined the doll and the inscription closely. "This is an ancient symbol. It means soul and captivity. These dolls were used in rituals to seal souls," he said, turning pale. "You have to be careful with such things. It's best to get rid of it." We laughed off his words, but the unease deep within only grew stronger. That night, I had the nightmare again. This time the doll stood by my bed and whispered something in an unintelligible language. Its eyes were glowing, and I felt cold fingers touch my face. I woke up screaming and saw the doll lying next to me on the pillow. Now I was sure there was something wrong with this doll. I called David and asked him to come over. He arrived a few minutes later, still not believing my words, but when he saw my frightened look and the doll on the pillow, his face turned pale. We decided to get rid of it. We took the doll and headed to the river to drown it. Along the way, we both felt something invisible watching us. We threw the doll into the water and watched with relief as it disappeared into the depths. But the sense of relief was short-lived. The next day, the doll reappeared in my room, completely dry and with the same malicious gleam in its eyes. It was impossible, but the fact remained. I felt that the doll was somehow bound to us and would not allow itself to be disposed of so easily. We turned to Jack for help, and he suggested performing an exorcism. That night, we gathered in his basement, surrounded by candles and ancient symbols. Jack began to recite spells, and the air in the room grew heavy, as if saturated with evil. The doll, lying on the table, suddenly began to tremble and emit a quiet laugh. The laugh turned into a scream as Jack approached with a dagger, ready to complete the ritual. Suddenly, the doll fell out of his hands and rolled under the table. We felt the air fill with cold, and the light from the candles began to dim. Jack screamed, continuing to recite spells. But the doll reappeared in front of us, its eyes glowing with a red light. I felt an invisible force grip me, and I realized the doll was trying to possess my soul. But in the last moment, Jack struck decisively and the doll shattered into pieces, letting out one final malicious scream. Everything went silent, and we could feel the evil dissipating from the room. Exhausted and scared, we knew we had won. The next day, we buried the remains of the doll deep in the forest and never returned to that house again. Now when I close my eyes, I still see its burning eyes and hear the soft whisper reminding me that not all toys are meant for playing, and not all the world's mysteries should be unraveled. But as it turned out, our liberation was temporary. After several weeks, I began to hear whispers at night. That same sinister, barely perceptible whisper that crawls under your skin and makes your blood run cold. One night, I woke up to find the window in my room wide open, although I was sure I had closed it before going to bed. On the windowsill lay a toy, not the same doll, but a small wooden soldier that seemed to be watching me with hatred. I picked up the soldier and felt a chill pierce through my hand. It was surprisingly heavy for its small figure. That night I couldn't sleep, feeling its cold gaze upon me. The next day I decided to go back to Jack and tell him everything. He was surprised to see me with the new toy in my hands. "This can't be," he whispered. "We destroyed the doll. How could this toy have come to you?" Jack examined the soldier and noticed the same engraving on its base as on the doll. "It seems this curse is more complex than we thought," he said. "Perhaps the spirit didn't just bind itself to the doll, but is capable of moving between objects. We need to perform a more powerful ritual to rid ourselves of this evil once and for all." In the evening, we gathered in the old house where we had first found the doll. Jack had prepared everything necessary for the ritual: candles, ancient books, and artifacts that could amplify his power. We could feel the air filling with tension, as if the house itself was resisting our actions. As Jack began the ritual, the soldier on the table started to shake and emit the same sounds as the doll. The temperature in the room dropped sharply, and the candles began to flicker. Suddenly, I felt an invisible force pick me up and pull me towards the soldier. I fought with all my might, but the spirit was too strong. Jack shouted the spells, and at some point the light flared into a bright flame. The soldier exploded, scattering into tiny pieces. The room filled with thick smoke, and I felt the grip on me loosen. When the smoke cleared, Jack stood, breathing heavily, his face pale but his eyes alight with determination. The fragments of the soldier were scattered on the floor, yet we felt no relief. It seemed as though the evil was everywhere, lying in wait for its next strike. We decided we needed more information. The following day, we went to the local archives to find any mention of the house or the curse we had unleashed. The librarian, old Mrs. Green, helped us locate old newspapers and records about the town's residents. We learned that the house where we found the doll once belonged to John Hartman, known in the town as an eccentric doll maker. Hartman vanished under mysterious circumstances over 100 years ago, and there were rumors that he dabbled in black magic, using his toys to capture souls. This information intensified our fear, but also held the promise of a solution. We turned to the local church's priest, Father O'Connor. He listened to our story and suggested a powerful cleansing of the house. On the night of the cleansing, we reconvened in the Hartman house. Father O'Connor brought several parishioners ready to assist. They held candles and recited prayers as the priest prepared for the ritual. The atmosphere was tense, as if the house itself was resisting our efforts. Father O'Connor began to recite the prayers in Latin, and the air around us started to vibrate. The temperature dropped suddenly, and we felt an invisible force try to stop us. But the prayers continued, and the light from the candles grew brighter, piercing through the darkness. Suddenly the house shook, and the walls began to crack. We heard a wild scream, as if thousands of souls were crying out in unison. At that moment, I felt the spirit that had been haunting us try to break free. We did not falter, continuing the prayers and focusing all our will on banishing the evil. Then the house went quiet. The scream stopped, and the temperature began to normalize. Father O'Connor finished the ritual, and we felt the weight lift from our shoulders. The evil had left this house, and we hoped it was for good. The next morning we left the house, feeling tired but liberated. We returned to our normal lives, but fear and unease continued to haunt us. We knew such curses do not disappear without a trace. Months passed, and life began to return to normal. But one night, just when I had almost forgotten the nightmare, I heard that whisper again. It was faint but clear, echoing from the depths of the past. I got up from my bed and looked at the windowsill. There lay a new toy, a small plush bear, looking straight at me with its glass eyes. My heart stopped in my chest when I realized the nightmare wasn't over yet. The spirit was still with us, and its malevolence had not diminished. It had found a new way to manifest, and I knew that the battle was only just beginning. We met again with Jack and Father O'Connor. Now we understood that we had to do more than just expel the spirit. We needed to find a way to permanently free its soul. Jack suggested a more radical approach, to find the remains of John Hartman and conduct a liberation ritual. We went to the old cemetery where Hartman was rumored to be buried. The night was dark and cold, the moon shining dimly, casting an eerie atmosphere. We found an old grave with a half-erased inscription and began to dig. When we reached the coffin, the old wooden box fell apart, and we saw Hartman's skeleton, its bones white and brittle. Father O'Connor began to recite prayers, and we felt the earth around us start to quake. At that moment, the whispering grew louder, turning into a scream. Hartman's spirit appeared before us, his face twisted with malice and suffering. He stretched his translucent hands towards us, but Father O'Connor continued with the prayers, and the spirit began to weaken. Finally, with the last words of the prayer, Hartman's spirit disappeared, leaving us in complete silence. We buried the remains and prayed for his soul, hoping he would finally find peace. Now, when I close my eyes, I no longer hear the whispering. The darkness has receded, and I know that we have liberated not only ourselves, but also the unfortunate soul of John Hartman. But sometimes, in the silence of the night, I still feel a faint breeze, like the echo of past horrors. And it reminds me that evil is always close by, ready to return if given the chance.